Welcome. You're watching Measuring What Matters, making circular progress tangible, in which we hear from different perspectives why measurement is key to achieving their agendas and our social, our climate and SDG goals. We are honored here today by the presence of Ms. Stientje van Veldhoven, the driver behind this whole conference, but also the Minister of Environment leading the Netherlands' circular economy efforts and a board member of the Platform for Accelerating the Circular Economy, PACE, of which we have heard so much these days. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Great to be here.
You really are the driving force behind circular economy here in the Netherlands. You personally convinced our Prime Minister to really embrace this topic. What motivates you so much to work towards circular economy?
Well, if you look at the great challenges that we are facing as a planet, there are three and they are absolutely interlinked. It's about biodiversity loss, it's about climate change, and it is about pollution. And if you want to solve those three crises, then there is one solution that tackles all of these agendas, and that is the circular economy.
Yeah.
And it can raise up to 20% of our total climate goals. So you could also say we cannot achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement if we do not look beyond energy to circular economy. So it's fantastic to be here with all these people driving this force and driving for change to a circular economy.
Absolutely. You're also really pushing for circular economy metrics. In the last few years, you've pushed towards collaboration on this topic. Metrics sounds quite technical. What's the potential of circular economy metrics, and why is this international collaboration necessary to achieve it?
Well, the international collaboration is key because no one can do this alone. And that is it's really a new field, so we have to develop it with all the knowledge from partners across the world. And why is it so crucial? Because if you want to know if you're en route to your target and if you're going fast enough, because we are in a short time, so we have lots to do in little time, then you want to know if you're on track. And how do you measure if you're on track? You can only do that if you have the right indicators and if you can measure the progress that you're making. It's also very useful for governments to know if their policies are effective and efficient. And of course, it's crucial for businesses too, because it can get them rated on their way to full circularity.
Yeah, it's really about sharing a language to understand where we stand and how fast we go. Well, the Netherlands is internationally seen as one of the front runners on the development of the circular economy metrics. Can you tell us about how you use these metrics here in the Netherlands?
What I would love to have in the next period of government is a target for circular economy in reducing greenhouse gases. And if you want to have a target, if you want to set a target, then you also need to know, can you measure if you are approaching that target? And so we set about first to have a full set of indicators to measure where do we stand now with regard to the circular economy. And so it also enables us to see how far are we from our goals. Mm-hmm. We want to be 50% circular in 2030 and 100% in 2050.
Yeah.
And of course, CO2 reduction is already quite thought out. People have indicators. But if you think about material efficiency, resource efficiency, how do you measure that? Because avoiding the use of a product or sharing the use of a product is also material efficiency. It's not the same as recycling. So especially if you look at the whole of circular economy, in all of its elements, which are all crucial, if we want to stay within the planetary boundaries with 10 billion people on this planet, it's quite a challenge to find the right metrics.
Yeah, the metrics at the end goal are quite clear, 100%, but how do we get there?
Yeah.
We're going to dive into that in this session. Let's have a seat and talk about it some more. Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
again. Welcome to this session. The upcoming hour, we will be asking our very interesting set of speakers to answer these two questions. One, why are metrics important? And what are the necessary next steps that we must take together? This topic has already been discussed for several years, and although we have seen progress in the field, there is still a lot of work to do. And the opportunity of a simple and easy to understand circular metrics is not fully utilized yet, so let's aim for some next steps of action in the upcoming hour. In this session, we will work towards 5 calls to actions with the speakers, and we hear from them what they will do to keep the drumbeat going for circular economy and climate. We would also like to hear from you in this hour that we have through 2 polls, and I'm happy to invite you to share your questions with us through the Ask the Speaker function. But let me introduce our diverse panel with whom we will be discussing this topic in the upcoming hour. Online, we have 4 gentlemen joining us. Mr. Hans Bruinings, the Executive Director of the European Environment Agency. Good afternoon, Mr. Wiebe Dreyer. It's a pleasure to have you, Chairman of the Managing Board of Rabobank. And Mr. Manish Bapna, the Interim President of the World Resources Institute. Thank you for being here with us, and Professor Yuichi Moriguchi, Vice President of the National Institute for Environmental Studies in Japan. Good day to you. As we just heard, there is enormous potential and the opportunities for metrics driving our global climate and SDG agendas. So let us see where we stand then. I'm going to ask you a question first. Where is your organization or government or business on its circular economy journey? Are you exploring A, B, starting, C, well underway, or would you say D, mission accomplished? I would congratulate you then, because that'd be quite impressive. We will take a look at the poll results in just a minute, but first let me ask my first question to Mr. Bapna. At the WRI, where do you say you stand? Are you mission accomplished yet?
I think we're still at the early stages. This is such an incredibly important agenda, in no small part because a lot of the low-hanging fruit is what WRI, what many organizations have been focusing on so far. But if we're really going to go beyond where we need to be in 2030 to see the deep transformation of key economic systems, we have so much more work to do. So early, but committed.
Early but committed. So is that B, I think, starting then, right? It's more than exploring. Right. You've already committed. We are awaiting the poll results. I will talk with Wiebe Dreyer in just a moment. But Stientje, where do you think the Dutch government is?
Well, I'd say underway with impatience, because I really feel that there is so much to do. And of course, we have started. We now have our first integrated circular economy report. That gives an indication of where we stand in the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. But there's so much more work to do, especially if you want to look up higher on the R ladder, as we call it, like the refuse, reuse, repair. Mm-hmm. All of these elements, we still have so much work to do. So fantastic to have you all here. And let's see how we can jointly move forward this agenda.
Absolutely. And we are getting in the results. So how do you feel about this? Watching, 41%, 42% says we're well underway, so that is good. But I hope that you still get that impatient vibe that we just heard about, because, of course, there's still a lot to be done. About 30% says they're starting, and another 30% says that they're exploring, right? So no one said mission accomplished, which is good because that could lead to complacency, and we can definitely not afford that. Let me turn to our next guest, who uses metrics in the day-to-day decision making. Wiebe Dreyer, Chairman of the Managing Board of Rabobank, an international bank headquartered in the Netherlands, to share your experiences from the private and finance sector. Where is Rabobank on its circular economy journey, and how are metrics helping drive forward the priorities?
Well, I think we're underway, like 40% in the polls, but it's a long way, and I think it's a little bit like walking to Rome. It starts with a couple of first steps, and then it's still a long walk. And that's, I think, where we all are. And therefore, I think this conference today and yesterday is so important. As a cooperative bank, sustainability is integrated into all our business operations, and our inclusive approach is aimed at making customers and stakeholders more sustainable. And we try to getting there step by step. And we use that by our financial solutions, our knowledge, helping them with ideas, and the networks of putting them together, and to help them essentially make their systems future-proof.
And how are
goal is
metrics
to
helping?
stimulate-
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes, well, they're essential. The only way you can do it is by measuring progress. Also, the only way you can do this, Sophie, is by connecting also the measurement to the results. And so, for example, we have created the first, and let me call it the food waste reduction loan. The SDG 12.3 is linked to food waste, and we've created a specific loan with a lower interest rate, connected to specific reduction of waste in the food supply chain of Ecoplaza, a Dutch organic supermarket chain. And this loan rewards this client for reducing the waste of food, which is a huge issue in the food supply chain. About 30% of the food globally is lost somewhere in the food supply chain.
Yeah, so you measure how well they handle their food waste, and if they do well, they get a lower interest rate. That's a very specific way
the idea.
of using metrics.
And I think the challenge here is that, Sophie, is that on a specific client and a specific issue of food waste, it's easily measurable. So there you can do it. The challenge of this conference is to get to a standard set of metrics that apply the general movement to a more circular economic system.
Absolutely.
And that's, I think, the challenge and the importance of finding those metrics that help finance it also at a higher level.
Right, absolutely. I think everyone agrees about that. Let me then turn to Mr. Hans Bruinings. Thank you, Wiebe, for elaborating on your very concrete examples. Hans Bruinings, the Executive Director of the European Environment Agency, which is an agency of the European Union whose task it is to provide sound, independent information on the environment to support sustainable development by the provision of timely, targeted, relevant, and reliable information to policymaking and the public. So Hans, what are the priorities for the EEA, and what are the major developments in the European Union in the field of circular economy metrics?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the panel. And I think the topic that we're discussing is extremely relevant. When I look at the European level, the circular economy is one of the priority objectives under the European Green Deal, and very much aligned with how Stientje van Veldhoven was framing it. It is regarded as the key component that relates to the climate neutrality objective, the objective of strong ecosystems, but also human health. It is an enabler that is absolutely necessary. And it goes to the core of things because it relates to our systems of production and consumption. Now, the European Union, with its circular economy package, has had a monitoring framework and for the moment is reviewing and updating that, primarily based on existing indicators and data, which is good, but it has to be a starting point because we all know that if we want to move ahead, we will need to be innovative. New types of data and indicators will need to be developed. We will need to adapt the monitoring and the data and the indicators to increasingly globalized value chains where material inputs and resources are used. So it is an important stepping stone to measure where we are in Europe, but very much with the awareness that we need to further develop. And that is exactly where the agency, together with the Commission, with PACE, with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and with a number of member countries, including the Netherlands, has taken the initiative to set up the Bellagio Principles for the development of circular economy and resource efficiency indicators, exactly to bring together the knowledge and to strive for a set of standard indicators. And I can speak more to that later on, but that's where we are in Europe for the moment.
Yeah, we'll definitely get back to the Bellagio Principles because it gives us a nice framework to discuss this further. Thank you so much for now. Let me then turn to our fourth speaker who joins us online from Japan. Welcome, Professor Yuichi Moriguchi, Vice President of the National Institute for Environmental Studies, a research institute that plays a central role in Japan to address the key environmental challenges. I would like to ask you the same question. What are the circular economy ambitions for Japan, and how are metrics helping drive forward these priorities, Professor?
Okay, thank you very much for invitation to non-European. But before representing a non-European perspective, let me briefly introduce my experience in the international collaboration context. Triggered by an event in 1995, Wuppertal Institute, Germany, which hosted a workshop in indicators for sustainable development, World Resources Institute, Dutch Environment Ministry, and my institute, NIES, initiated international joint study on economy-wide material flows. Coincidentally, 3 out of 4 institutions are here in this session. This is the origin of current material flow accounts and resource productivity metrics by Eurostat. Such international movement backed up the adoption of metrics and targets within Japanese policy for circular society. As early as the year 2003, 3 core metrics based on material flow accounts were officially adopted by the government, which cover final disposal of waste, circular use of materials, and resource productivity. At least conceptually, I believe this set of 3 metrics is concise and well-balanced. However, they are too macroscopic to measure achievement by efforts of actors, in particular by private sector, who want to quantify their own contribution. We have been trying to improve the set of metrics, for example, downscale to industrial sector and break down by material categories. But long list of metrics, currently more than 100, huge, hinders transparent communication. Metric of circular use of materials, such as recycling rate, is easy to understand and applicable to multiple levels. However, we should keep in mind that circularity itself is not the end goal. We have to assess if increasing circularity contributing to minimize both waste at the downstream and the extraction of non-renewable resources from the nature upstream. Mm-hmm. In terms of the linkage to climate, we found recent Japanese resource productivity metric is highly influenced by consumption of fossil fuels. We also find that avoided carbon emission by recycling and energy recovery of waste is increasing. That is good news. The bad news is that it is not enough for carbon reduction target. Let me recap. Circularity is a means, not an end goal. We'd better revisit the question, what is our end goal to reach it by circularity to shortlist appropriate metric of circular economy or circular society in our terminology. Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing all of those things together, Professor. So what is our end goal is really the question, and then circularity is not a goal in itself.
It's an instrument.
Yeah.
It's absolutely an instrument. It's an instrument in trying to ensure that we will be able also in 2050 to live within the planetary boundaries with 10 billion people on this planet. Right. Avoiding that we have catastrophic climate change, avoiding that we have catastrophic biodiversity loss, and avoiding that we have large-scale pollution, thereby making it impossible to live on this planet with those 10 billion people. So those are our end goals. And what I liked very much is if you want to see to what extent certain elements of circular economy policy are effective and efficient in contributing to reaching those goals, that is why you need metrics. Because otherwise you cannot distinguish between one measure, one policy measure, for example, that has limited effect and another policy measure that has great effect. And that's what you want to know. We need to pick up speed, and therefore we need to know what is effective and efficient, cost efficient. There are so many reasons why we need these metrics. And I was very touched by what Wiebe Dreyer said about the step to Rome, because fortunately all roads lead to Rome. So as long as we all work in that same direction, Commission. I think we are on the right track. And of course, it is fantastic to see the leadership from Japan. I recently spoke to Minister Koizumi also, and it is really great to see. And it's no wonder for me that he says that 3 out of the original organizations are now also on this panel. I'd like to believe that that's not a coincidence, but you've all worked so hard on this. It's fantastic to take it one step further today.
Absolutely. We're all on the way to Rome, but we just need some metrics, just as Google Maps would tell us how much longer it's going to take. That's how you get somewhere, right? So we just heard from our speakers in the private and public and civil society sectors. They all share the same North Star. Actually, it's in the south, from my regard, Rome. There's an enormous potential and the opportunities of metrics driving these agendas. So let's see what the audience thinks if one of these sectors should play a more prominent role in developing these metrics. So what sector should take the lead on establishing circular metrics? Is that the private sector, A, B, the public sector, C, civil society, or D, all sectors are needed for different purposes? We gave you a very diplomatic out there in option D. I wouldn't hold it against you if you chose that answer, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit on your answer in the chat box function. It'd be really nice. Mr. Bruinings, let me turn to you. What sector do you think should play a leading role then in establishing these circular metrics? And where do we see differences and similarities between sectors in terms of measurement, and where is the collaboration needed, or where do the sectors need to reinforce each other? Boy, that was a long question.
Well, I think the public sector plays a critical role because the overall societal goal needs to be embedded in a clear target for circularity, resource efficiency, but also the impact of our use of resources. And by setting that standard and that target, you will have an impact on what is happening with economic actors, what is happening in civil society. And that is very comparable to climate change, actually, where it was the overall target in public institutions set on greenhouse gas emissions that has then led to an elaborate development of indicators that are used across the board in civil society, even at household level, measuring your own footprint, and in industry. And we are rather far away from that in circular economy. So clarity on the overall targets and measurements, science-based, and then translating them with civil society actors, but also with economic actors, into something that allows us to actually monitor the change dynamics and why things are working or not is critical. And we will not get there if we keep measuring at the very macro level, as was mentioned before, because we're talking about billions and trillions of tons of materials, but it's not refined enough to stimulate specific sectors or parts of production and consumption patterns to actually change. So lead by the public sector, not because the government is the most important, but because they represent societal objectives over the long term, and then a solid collaboration with other actors to come to usable indicators in support of those societal goals.
Right. About 20% of the respondents agree with you, Mr. Bruinings, because 70% said all sectors are needed for different purposes. Then at the same time, the public sector could take the lead if that might be their specific role. 8% says the private sector, only 2% civil society. So private sector, Wiebe Dreyer, for you, the same question?
Well, I wouldn't agree necessarily with the low percentage of the private sector. I think it actually is both. And let me use another metaphor on the way to Rome. We're stuck a little bit in a traffic jam here. And the idea is that the only way to get this traffic jam going is all constituents need to start moving almost congruently. And I think it's the public sector and the private sector and also the NGOs. And one of the ingredients in that collective movement is how we measure progress. And we do need the public sector for the frameworks such as the EU Green Deal, but also the EU taxonomy. I think that's a crucial initiative to create a common base and measurement. But we need the collaboration with the private sector. And so I like to give an example of the joint effort that we as Rabobank do together with the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure under the leadership of the minister to create the beneficial factors by which the financial sector can contribute. And one of the initiatives there is the working group to establish the metrics. I think the metrics, creating a common language for what it takes, is essential to get the traffic jam moving. And let me just close with one thought here too, which is, I think climate change and CO2 reduction is blessed with one thing, that CO2 is an easily measurable, one-dimensional metric. And the trouble with circular economy is it's multidimensional. I think within that, waste is a very, very simple measure that we can track. So I think the search for these metrics has to start also with a number of uniformly defined measures. And waste has aspects of these simple one-dimensional tricks that we can apply to gradually move to a more circular economy.
Yeah, thank you very much for pointing that out. And I heard Stientje agree.
Absolutely, and I think two short comments. Lead by the public sector because they represent society. Well, I often see too that politics is running behind and the market is already taking up certain elements. So we are very useful for codifying a movement which is already there, but we're not always leading. And we often see fantastic initiatives in the private sector or in civil society demanding us to do something. So I wouldn't underestimate the importance of those movements within those groups to actually push a government to start taking their responsibility.
Yes, Professor, are you offended by the metaphor that we're using as a non-European? It might be more inclusive to say, okay, we're going to take the road to Tokyo. Would you have a suggestion?
Okay, Tokyo. So I think that maybe always we think the steps to so how we can go to the not the goal, but the next kind of milestones. I'm not sure if it is a goal or not.
Yeah, thank you very much. Turning to our last speaker, Manish Bapna, president of the World's Resource Institute, a renowned international research institute and think tank that uses data and metrics across its programs and that has experienced the force of creating a widely accepted standards in other areas. Thank you for that. While reflecting on the insights we just gathered from our poll and also your experience as WRI, let's look into the future and try to sketch what the way forward could look like and what are the near-term opportunities that you see while we are working towards the extremely important COP26 in November in Glasgow. Your audio is muted, I think, or is that something that we can fix? I'm so sorry. Absolutely.
No problem. Is it working now?
It is. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So really, really useful to actually think about where we need to be in 2050, where we need to be in 2030, and what that means for the coming year. So we talked a lot about the end goal, tackling the climate, tackling the biodiversity, tackling the poverty inequality crises. In order to get there, we need to see a profound transformation of a wide range of key economic systems. The energy system, transportation, industry, food and land use. That means in 2030, we need to make very significant progress. And why the next year, why the run up to Glasgow is so important is in no small part because we have this very exceptional moment when the world is starting to reflate economies, to spend, to recover from the pandemic. And how we recover is absolutely important. And two things we need to see. We need to see to complement the long-term net zero goals, SDG goals that countries are making with very short-term greater ambition. And we need to see, particularly in climate, the expansion of our work beyond the power sector to looking at transport, to looking at food and land use, to looking at industry. So how we get greater commitments, broader commitments to get us on this path to transformation is critical in the run-up to Glasgow.
How do you see the World Resources Institute role in stimulating the systems change?
So our approach is to count it, to change it, to scale it. So the data, the analysis, the metrics, absolutely essential to really get a clear idea of what we need to do. We see the changing as the policy change, the shifts we need to see investment to move us on the path, but ultimately we need to scale. We need to be able to think about the platforms, the tipping points to actually create those system changes. And I just want to pick up and use as an example of how we've done that around the greenhouse gas protocol. This is an example of how we measure greenhouse gas emissions. We developed this protocol back in the 90s, and we did it through a very intensive multi-stakeholder process involving the private sector, involving governments, involving civil society over 4 years. And now this accounting standard for how we measure greenhouse gas emissions is the leading standard used by the vast majority of Fortune 500 companies, by cities and by countries. And so that second pole, I would argue, is very much an effort to try to get different sectors together to solve this problem around metrics.
Absolutely. A question coming in from the audience for you, Mr. Bubna. What has the WRA learned from the process of the implementation of the GHG protocol, which really builds on your previous answer?
Clear principles that inform consistent management and measurement. We learned very clearly that action management can only be really taken when you have metrics, when you have measurement in place. So the confidence in the measurement systems is absolutely critical to get to management, which is what's critical to get to real action.
Thank you very much. We're about halfway in our session. I think we're doing really good so far. We have heard from all of our speakers how metrics are able to drive an agenda forward. We will now dive deeper into the opportunities that lie ahead of us. And I would also like to encourage you to ask your questions to us. Hans, I'd like to turn to you because you talked about the Bellagio Principles. It'd be very interesting to hear more about that.
Yeah, well, we about a year or two ago, we saw a proliferation of all sorts of initiatives to measure resource efficiency, material use, circularity, but there wasn't much unity in it. And rather than starting from the hodgepodge that was out there and trying to sort it out, we said, is it not more useful to think of a set of core principles that can be used by public institutions, private institutions, civil society, economic actors, and others that can drive the development of a system of monitoring and indicators. So what we did was we came up together with our partners, the Italian Environmental Protection Agency, the network of environmental protection agencies in Europe, the Commission and others, with a set of core principles. One element is, of course, you need to understand what you need to be monitoring. So a clear definition and the boundaries is important. And then coming with indicators that capture the full extent, which for the moment is not the case. So you need to do a gap analysis. What are we missing to really capture circularity and resource efficiency? Then selection criteria for good indicators, because we see a lot of indicators spring up, but they're not necessarily very useful or easy to maintain or easy to communicate or to apply across a broader set of sectors. Then which actors do you need to have involved? And that's where I think indeed each actor plays its own role. You've got public actors that are connected to public policies and standard setting, often target setting. Private actors have other strengths. Scientific actors have yet other strengths, and civil society brings its own perspective. So whom to have involved? Fundamental is the data credibility. Where are you going to get the data? Does it have comparability? Is it of good quality? Does it provide legitimacy to the whole exercise? Then science-based targets, because indeed, as has been said by the others, you need these indicators and the metrics to go in a certain direction. So you need a target and you need to understand how far you are, and that drives the whole undertaking. But then finally, I think, and equally important, it needs to be transparent and you need to be able to communicate it. Yeah? It should not be a black box of indicators. Just like we have a lot of public debate on the climate indicators that we use and that by now go well beyond measuring greenhouse gas emissions as one category, you need a transparent public debate about that. So communicating where you are in circularity, which is more complex already, becomes very important. So if you live by those principles, and we are now taking them to what we call the Bellagio partnership, where we will be implementing them with a number of partners to test out the principles. I think that is what we have been establishing. They're very much in line and in the spirit of what the other panelists have been saying as well.
Are the Bellagio principles universal? Can they be applied to countries outside of Europe?
Yeah, I think they can. And what a really important contribution is that they are not only aiming to monitor the impact in a country or in a narrowly defined sector, but also transborder along systems of production and consumption, which are mostly global. And they are also not only looking at the material use per se, but also at the impact of material use on climate, on health, on biodiversity. And that's when you can really make the connections to these other broad objectives that we are aiming for by 2050, which is living well within the limits of a planet. And that means ecosystems, the climate system, and also human health and well-being primarily. So that was the whole goal of the exercise. So we are now with partners starting implementation, also in connection with European policies and how they can drive innovation in circular economy measurements.
Yeah. Let me ask that final question also to the professor. Do you find the Bellagio principles also applicable to the Japanese situation?
Okay, so before answering directly to your question, in the history of indicators, I found another Bellagio principles related to choose and design of indicators. That is not for circular economy, but for broader issue of sustainable development. That was discussed at Bellagio 25 years ago by 24 experts, including those from IISD, again from WRI, the White House, RIVM in the Netherlands, Eurostat, and so on. Unfortunately, I was not there, but I found many names of my friends in the list of experts. In this previous case, I was not aware of the Bellagio principle itself, but I have shared fundamental views of indicators choice through discussion with these experts in other opportunities. And what I learned from Europe during the 1990s was reflected the choice of indicators for Japanese circular society policy. Thus, activities in Europe are truly influential to at least Japan, a country outside of EU. So in terms of a more recent Bellagio process mentioned by Hans, it has not yet been recognized in Japan as far as I know, but I found many relevant topics such as Principles 5 on multi-level monitoring. Japanese stakeholders are more aware of international discussion with ISO Technical Committee TC323 for circular economy. That also includes indicators. Though experts involved in ISO TC may not be aware of Bellagio process yet, unfortunately. We have to have a link between national policy and the microscopic level.
Absolutely. We need to spread the word. Thank you very much. Let me turn to Stientje. What do you think of the collaborative result so far, and what are the next steps?
Well, I think it's amazing, the progress that has already been made, but I think it's also fantastic to see the opportunities that are still out there to link and to spread the message even further. So I think it's very, very promising that Bellagio is not a set of principles only, but a process, and it's going to be a partnership. And that I think also involves, also allows for the involvement of many more regions across the world, because it needs to be, we have one planet, so this needs to be a set which serves us all. So I think it would be fantastic also to learn from what's been happening in other regions. Two points that I'd like to highlight that are crucial, I think, in what has just been said is data credibility and the link to science. Because if we want our people to trust targets set by governments, then they need to know that those targets are based on measurements which are credible. So this data credibility is really, really crucial.
Yeah.
And what makes it very complex in circular economy is that often results are not only within your own company, but somewhere within the chain. And so how do we link those efforts in a chain of companies to the results of one or the other company? And I think that's one of the points that makes it even more complex and even more challenging and even more rewarding also if we find the solutions. But I think we still have a lot of work to do together.
I have a question for Manish. What are the next steps? Actually, the same question. And how can science and research help? We need to have reliable data, as just stressed. I understand that PACE, which is hosted by the World Resources Institute, has done research on the current state of play of metrics. Can you reflect on the findings and value of that report?
No, absolutely. So we have the privilege of hosting PACE, and we're delighted about that. We recently undertook 2 global landscape assessments of circular economy metrics, one looking at the public sector, one looking at the private sector. Very interesting to kind of take stock of where we are on this metrics journey and try to see what were some of the issues that emerged from this landscape assessment. And just want to pick up on 4 themes that emerged from these 2 studies that resonate or echo many of the earlier messages my colleagues have mentioned today. So the first point about what the minister just mentioned, data credibility, data availability, absolutely essential that we need to get that right. The second is that we're looking for indicators or metrics that are actionable. You can collect oftentimes indicators that might be very interesting intuitively or kind of intellectually, but they need to be actionable. So we need to make sure we measure those things that can lead to real world actions. The third is we're seeing an incredible proliferation or fragmentation in initiatives around metrics. So we need to see greater coherence, and there's going to be a real need to bring this together into a framework that everyone finds credible and legitimate and ultimately uses. And fourth and lastly, we need metrics that are intuitive to the public, that inspire action. Having metrics that are difficult to communicate and don't inspire won't necessarily get us the traction, the action that we need to see.
Absolutely. Actually, that taps. So sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Babner, but that taps right into a question that we've been getting. Do we need easy to understand indicators or more technical, complex indicators? As soon as you start mentioning the word metrics, people start thinking, "Oh gosh, this is going to be complicated." But it is important to get the public on board, right?
It's crucial to get the public on board to have easy to understand metrics that people also understand will mean a change in their environment. And that is also, I think, the CO2, the greenhouse gas emissions protocol has been so forceful because people understood that CO2 is leading to climate change. And even though there are many other greenhouse gases, people always talk about CO2. And so you need to recognize the complexity behind the fact that you have a simple target that you can communicate about. There is a complexity behind. So you need both, I'd say, because there are other greenhouse gases and we need to work on those too. But it's very good that we have a clear indicator, the CO2 indicator, that politicians like myself can talk to Parliament and say we need to take these measures because they reduce CO2 and reducing CO2 is crucial to avoid climate change.
Absolutely.
So the story needs to be, we need to be able to tell the story.
Yeah, apprehensive. Yeah. Someone who's not afraid of a couple of numbers, Mr. Draaier, Wiebe, as a user of circular economy metrics, what more is needed in metric development to help you achieve your objectives? What would you say to the to the developers of these metrics?
Well, I certainly agree, as I indicated earlier, that it's helpful to the general progress to have a simple indicator. And I think, for example, waste reduction is one of those. But it doesn't help in any specific supply chain. You have to get more advanced. I have 2 pleas. One is that there are many initiatives ongoing in terms of coming to this metric. And I think the world would move faster if we try to bring those efforts together into a common set. And be they as they are more complex or less complex, but certainly driving towards one set for a specific supply chain would certainly help the progress to accelerate. And the second is they should also enable that we can find ways to tax or at least price the use of resources. And so new steel is more demanding on the environment than reused steel. What can we do in terms of taxing and pricing so that the people are incentivized to not only measure the progress on circularity, but also get true price cost allocated to it. And maybe one final thought is that financing, I represent the private sector in this conversation, but I also represent the financing community. I think it's crucial that we find ways to finance, and there are particular complexities around financing circular aspects, and they tie to metrics. But the trouble is that usually the benefits are further down the chain. A company makes a circular move, the benefits sit further in the chain. You have to be able to measure the impact of the circular approaches down the value chain for us to be able to finance a player up the value chain.
Right.
That's something that is crucial particularly for circular economic progress.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. And do you want to respond to that?
I think it's completely right, and that's also what makes it so complex. But the point of on your two pleas, I think the exercise that has been done by PACE is a really, really good exercise because it maps where we stand now. And if we want to start integrating, bringing things together, enhancing the Bellagio process, we need to know where we are now, so what we have on the table, and start to integrate those, linking circular economy to the SDGs. And the second, on taxation, there are some examples out there. And so I think we also need to share those best practices. For example, we are going to have a virgin plastic tax in the Netherlands as part of our European Green Deal, and also in the way that we tax companies putting packaging on the market. There's a price difference of 40% between packaging which is easily recyclable and packaging which is not easily recyclable. And this difference was instituted by industry itself. So industry also has some instruments that they can put on the market itself, creating that price difference and coming closer to that true pricing.
And why would companies then do that? Because it's amazing if it happens, but there's an audience question coming in for Wiebe. Could you speak about incentives for companies to use metrics?
Well, the simplest of all incentives is a lower interest rate. And so the example that we've provided in this 12.3 loan that we gave in the Netherlands is you measure the reduction of waste in the chain and you get a lower interest rate. And that is a huge lever when it comes to finding new investments.
Absolutely, the food waste example. And at last, turning to Professor Moriguchi as an expert in the field, what do you think should be prioritized as collaborative next steps?
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, in my first round, I participated in international joint study in late 1990s, and 2 reports were published by World Resources Institute. The last chapter of the first report on the next steps mentioned the importance of international coordination and referred to the expected role of intergovernmental institutions. I myself had a chance to take that role as a chairperson of OECD's Working Group on Environmental Statistics, Indicators, and Accounting, and later as a member of International Resource Panel by UNEP. As a member of G7 or G8, Japanese government has taken leadership in the widespread of 3 R's concept: reduce, reuse, recycle, and experts contributed to the events for resource efficiency. That is another key word in circular economy.
Yeah.
And nevertheless, honestly speaking, actors other than Europe and North America have limited opportunity to access to mainstream such international collaboration because of the geographical and maybe language barriers. Big question is how to involve emerging economies, big consumers of global natural resources, in particular in Asia. COVID-19 pandemic may reduce such a barrier, as in the case of my online participation to this conference today. Another point I want to emphasize is to work more closely with carbon accounting and learn from experiences and actions for climate change mitigation. I've also been involved in official reporting of Japanese greenhouse gas emission inventory to UNFCCC. Domestically, we have annual regular follow-up meeting to check and review actions taken by industrial sectors towards their self-defined reduction target of greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gas accounting is much more established compared to CE metrics, but it also needed many years to evolve.
Yeah.
GHG emission accounting is a kind of common language across national, sectoral level to individual company level already. Of course, it is important to align circularity metrics, but we may start with harmonized accounting or prioritize materials as underlying data system for circular economy metrics and undertake some case studies to demonstrate its usefulness. For example, accounting of linear or circular for plastics will attract a lot of attention.
Yeah.
Of course, to realize such endeavor, internal collaboration between policymakers and academic experts is also a key for success.
Right. Thank you very much, Professor. We're going to talk about how the organizations that you all represent can keep the drumbeat for the circular economy and the climate action going in formulating these metrics. People are wanting to join the Bellagio Principles partnership. I don't know, is it a partnership yet, Hans? Because Baram wants to join it.
He's very welcome.
Yeah.
I would say as initial response, please reach out to the European Environment Agency. We will get back to you, and we are at the stage where we are bringing together people and formulating the agenda for the next steps. But we definitely will welcome new players in the partnership.
Awesome. And how will you keep the drumbeat going?
By illustrating that this type of collaboration actually delivers along the lines of what Wiebe and others have mentioned. We need to come with practical, usable, actionable sorts of solutions, and that can go from material passports of products and services to more aggregated elements. What I think we need to illustrate is that innovation, also through the Internet of Things, for example, and through blockchain technology, can really stimulate a new wave of how we monitor, measure where we are in the economy and in sustainability terms. So those are elements that we would like to work on, and I'm sure that will get noticed if we are successful at doing that.
Manish Bapna?
Great. Just two small comments before. I just want to pick up on the incentives for moving towards circular economy metrics.
Yes.
Efficiency, innovation really can create a business case for circular economy that can be inescapable, irresistible. And just on the issue of metrics, it's good to reflect on the challenges we've had with GDP and kind of dethroning GDP. It's that metric that we know isn't quite right, but we can't somehow shake off. And then on the other hand, you have the SDGs, which do a phenomenal job in trying to explain progress, but are cumbersome. And so thinking about a dashboard that takes a select set of metrics that are particularly relevant to an organization, a company, a country, and using headline indicators within a dashboard might be one way to address it. In terms of what we're going to do, the Circular Economy Indicators Coalition is an effort to try to bring greater coherence to the metrics conversation we're having today. We're going to lean in and really help support that, and we will continue to be hosting PACE, which we feel plays an invaluable role in moving this broader conversation on circular economy.
Awesome. I really like that idea of a dashboard. That should be like the weather forecast. In the morning, you want to check, like, where do we stand? How motivating people, like my mom is when she counts her steps every day. You want to get to that goal. So metrics can be very incentivizing and motivating, right?
Absolutely.
That would really work so well. Thank you for that. Professor, how will you be committed? Keep the drumbeat going?
Okay, yes. In terms of before talking about my role, and dashboard, you may or may not know that dashboard concept was already proposed.
Oh.
We do not have to reinvent that thing. Because the dashboard concept was developed by International Institute for Sustainable Development, IISD. That was a key actor of previous Bellagio Principle. Yeah. So we can learn from the history. We have a rich stock of academic knowledge within based on the international collaboration, intercontinental collaboration with the studies. So, as an individual expert, I would keep or I'd better say reactivate my role as a bridge between non-European and European, a bridge between material flow accounting and carbon or greenhouse gas accounting. I mean, a bridge between circular economy and climate, and a bridge between scientific experts like me and policymakers like you, Minister.
Yes.
So very recently, so that the Japanese government launched Japanese Partnership for Circular Economy. Yeah, not government. Yeah, I mean that's a public-private partnership that is the joint effort by 3 parties: Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, and Japanese Business Federation, Keidanren. I may have another role to contribute to this partnership, for example, to support multi-level monitoring of circular economy metrics.
We're going to get to the drumbeat of the Rabobank in just a second. Meanwhile, we got a question for the professor, so let's address this now as you're speaking. How can stakeholders along the value be brought together in order to be able to measure holistically and not just within the boundaries of the focal company?
A big question. So we always, so there are also the presented number 5 of Bellagio, principle. How to, apply the similar or consistent metrics to national, sectoral, or company level. That is quite crucial. But we can do it for, for example, greenhouse gas emission accounting system. That is quite consistent. Of course, including the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, and so on. So we have a methodologies, but already mentioned by other panelists. Greenhouse gas is the easier to understand, and it can be counted as a carbon equivalent, carbon dioxide equivalent. But circular economy, that is multidimensional, and also the multi-scales. So we still have a lot of questions to answer. So the scientists have to work quite hard with policymakers.
But at least we're taking steps towards Rome or Tokyo, but at least we share a North Star. Wiebe Dreyer, obviously Rabobank is already very involved in this topic. How will you keep that momentum and that commitment to developing metrics for the circular economy going?
Well, one of the things that we do is because circular economic actions are complex in nature for normal human beings and small companies. So what we do is we do a circular economy challenge for our clients. And It starts with a map per region. What is the level of circularity of this region? And then we engage with clients, companies and individuals, but mostly companies, about how can they start to experiment with circular economic enterprise activities. And I just wanted to close with a thought here, that an illustration by a very small company that makes working clothes. And they experimented with a recyclable working cloth type of material. And they were able to sell 5% of their total volume through this product. But they won 100% of their competitive bids because they were being circular. So I think there's also a up trading mechanism in play, that if you talk about this, if you engage the normal society in it, and they start the first step to Rome, it can also accelerate the overall acceptance and speed of the move to a more circular economy, using the measures and the metrics of this conference to establish the progress and define the progress and being able to finance it.
Very curious to hear your response to this, to these thoughts and these commitments towards the metrics in circular economy.
It is fantastic to hear all those commitments from Asia, from America, from the private sector, from knowledge institutions in Europe. So I think this is really what we need, a worldwide coalition spanning not only different countries, different continents, but also different sectors. We're in this together, we're all going to need each other. So I'm very, very much committed to continuing the work. And I want to thank Professor Moriguchi also for the historical perspective. Learning from the greenhouse gas protocol, I started this session saying that I am impatient, but I think from Japan I can learn that you also have to have some patience, because sometimes things take time. But with all the urgency that we feel, we need to realize also that this will take some time to get it right. But there's lots of work that we can do, and lots of experience also in the greenhouse gas protocol developments that we could learn from in trying to keep a certain pace in this. We are talking about PACE. We are an active supporter of PACE, and we're definitely going to continue our work with PACE and support them in all of the crucial work that they are doing with the Circular Economy Indicators Coalition, and also the Bellagio Partnership. I think we've got all the elements here on the table. And yesterday there was one very beautiful concrete example of how metrics can lead to great changes. Malek Sukar from Avera outlined yesterday how 5 years ago, all of a sudden, they made a big change in his company. And why was that? Because 5 years ago, they were starting to be measured on the ESG, the environmental and social goals. And on that spot, all of a sudden, they started changing their investment decisions. And now 90% of their capital investment decisions goes towards circularity. And that is how metrics, how abstract it may seem to be, turns investments into practice, into the right direction. We need to build back better. I think that was a very powerful comment that was made too. And that is what metrics work for.
Right, yeah, ESG, that's as tangible and as measurable as the food waste challenges that the food industry faces. And I think Wiebe explained really well how you can incentivize those types of changes. And that's the type of metrics that we need to talk about. Thank you so much, all of you, for your perspectives on this very important topic. It was very refreshing and interesting. Thank you so much. And thank you also for being here, Stientje van Veldhoven. Wonderful to have you by my side. We've heard about the importance of all of the players to collaborate. When working together, we can make full use of the enormous opportunities metrics bring the world today and in the coming years. Last but not least, I would like to thank everybody at home too for staying with us these 2 days, and the inspiration and the perspectives that you have offered, the questions you have asked. It was a pleasure to be your host. And please don't forget to tune in for the global closing on Channel 1 of the WCEF+Climate. See you there.